So we just received news about a huge case which was trying to use the Supreme Court's Bruen decision to attack a state's ban on rifles and then also magazines. So let's break down what just happened. Now, really quick before we jump into this video, I want to ask you all for a huge favor. Looking at some of my analytics, about 60% of all my viewers are actually not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to support what I'm doing here, if you want the 2A news like this to get out to more people, please consider subscribing to the channel. Again, you're not required to by any means, but if you want to support the channel, that's a great way to do it. And then also just double check your subscription because YouTube loves to unsubscribe people. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be breaking down an important case and an important decision that we just got out of the state of New Jersey. In one of the lawsuits, actually multiple lawsuits, that were challenging the state's ban on semi-automatic rifles, certain rifles, and classifying them as so-called assault weapons, and then also their magazine ban, essentially their ban on magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. The cases we're going to be covering are A&J RPC versus Platkin, and then also Cheeseman versus Platkin. Now, interestingly, the A&J RPC case, if you've been watching this channel for a long time, if you're one of those channel OGs who's been watching since 2019 and 2020, this is a case that we covered a lot when it was originally making its way to the Supreme Court and when it was on hold in front of the Supreme Court and also remanded back down to the lower court here after the Supreme Court issued their 2022 Bruen decision. Now, interestingly, the decision by the district court here is a motion for summary judgment. It's granting it partially in favor of some of the plaintiffs and then also granting a cross motion for summary judgment in favor of the state of New Jersey. So really what's happening here with this decision, if you just want to know generally what's going on, there was a narrow decision here, essentially because Bruen is such a strict standard. The court here that didn't want to really give any wins still had to give a limited win. And they gave a limited win as far as one specific classification of AR-15s, the Colt AR-15. So essentially they found that the state's restriction on Colt AR-15s was in fact unconstitutional under this New Jersey law, applying Bruen and the precedent here by the Supreme Court. But then when it came to magazines, the court here pretty much deviated from Bruen and tried to uphold this magazine ban and found that the magazine bans in the state were constitutional. Now, for those unaware, we're going to break down what generally happened with the A&J RPC case. Now, with the A&J RPC case, it was in reaction to a June 2018 essentially bill and law that was passed and essentially banned the possession of firearms magazines with a capacity to accept or hold more than 10 rounds. Now, the New Jersey law required owners to essentially modify their magazines and to permanently reduce the capacity or to destroy them. And then also one of the other alternatives was to turn them over to law enforcement. So very similar to what other states did when they banned magazines. Now, in August of 2018, the district court who reviewed this case originally denied A&J RPC's motion for a preliminary injunction, and they applied what is known as now the flawed two-step approach. So this is a case that made its way through the legal process before Bruen. So you had district courts and federal courts like the New Jersey courts, which were applying the means-end scrutiny, the tiered-based scrutiny, and the two-step approach when it came to Second Amendment cases. Of course, A&J RPC appealed that denial, but a divided panel of the Third Circuit upheld what the district court said in December of 2018. The case then returned back down to the district court, who ultimately reviewed the case and then granted a motion for summary judgment in favor of the state of New Jersey, upholding the magazine ban and finding it constitutional. That motion for summary judgment was then appealed once again to the Third Circuit, but the Third Circuit once again ruled in favor of the state of New Jersey. And then ultimately this case went to the Supreme Court. There was a request for en banc panel review in the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit denied it. And so the plaintiffs here went to the Supreme Court. And they were asking for the Supreme Court to review that motion for summary judgment and ultimately strike down the state of New Jersey's ban on magazines. Now, what was really interesting about this is all the same time, again, back in 2022, when the Supreme Court granted review to the Bruen case, and what ended up happening with the A&J RPC magazine ban case and a lot of other cases like the Duncan, California magazine ban case, they were all put on hold, and ultimately they were waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court on Bruen. Now, the Supreme Court, of course, issued their Bruen decision, striking down means-end scrutiny, striking down the two-step approach, and then, of course, all these cases were sent back down to the lower courts for reconsideration in light of Bruen. So this is a case that was remanded by the Supreme Court back in 2022. Now, when it went back into the hands of the district court, there were some other cases by organizations like FPC where they were challenging the rifle bans in New Jersey. And then what ended up happening here is the district court consolidated a bunch of those cases. So now the court here is reviewing not just the magazine ban in the ANJRPC case, but also the rifle ban case. And now finally we have the decision of the district court 2 years later. Now, some of the general takeaways of this decision is essentially, like I mentioned, they did find that the restriction in New Jersey, as specifically applied to the Colt AR-15, is in fact unconstitutional when looked at in light of Bruen and Heller and the other Supreme Court precedent and looking at some of the historical analogs. But also when looking at the magazine ban, the court here found that looking at Bruen and applying Bruen, the magazine ban here in New Jersey is constitutional. So that's where this is one of those weird decisions where you can really tell that the judge here didn't really want to give any positive wins. The judge here didn't really want to be pro 2A, but Bruen in some ways forced his hand on this issue of the Colt AR-15. But in every other aspect, it was a limited and anti-Second Amendment decision. He then goes on to say because of that stare decisis principle and him being bound by what the Supreme Court said, and then also he takes a shot at Congress saying, well, Congress also hasn't banned these items. I am therefore bound to have to say that this provision of the firearms law in New Jersey is unconstitutional as applied to specific AR-15s. So first, the judge here says that he is limiting his decision and his ruling only on AR-15s because he says that is what was fully briefed in front of him. He says that's what most of the evidence and arguments were made about. There was a challenge to the semi-automatic restrictions, I believe, at large. But since a lot of the discussion, I guess, was about AR-15s, he's saying, I only have evidence to make a ruling on AR-15s or Colt AR-15s, and so I'm going to limit my decision on those specific rifles. Now, really, when you look at his analysis as far as the AR-15s, it's all kind of goes down to Heller, the common use test, and really the discussion by the Supreme Court saying that a state like New Jersey cannot just have a categorical outright ban on a firearm that is clearly in common use for lawful purposes. Now, also there was a lot of back and forth and discussion in this brief and this decision about what is actually common use. You had one side, the pro 2A side, that says mere possession in numbers is common use and qualifies for common use. And then you had the state of New Jersey that makes the contrary argument that says no, common use is actual use. It is actual numbers and data about self-defense use. So here the court is actually rejecting that, which is good to see. They rejected the whole self-defense actual use argument and said that no, just common possession is true common use. So here the court struck down the state's restriction on the Colt AR-15, but again, very limited in scope. And then the court moved on to do the analysis about magazines. And here is really where things go off the rails with this specific case and this decision. The court here is saying that these items, these magazines, are clearly arms. So they reject the argument that magazines are just merely accessories and not arms protected by the Second Amendment. The court here actually says that accordingly, under the Third Circuit's finding, they agree that magazines, and they're kind of bound by the fact that magazines are arms within the meaning of the text of the Second Amendment. And then after finding that these are in fact arms, the court also finds that these magazines are in common use. The court states that large capacity magazines are commonly owned, given that the LCM amendment permits some level of large capacity magazine ownership in the state of New Jersey and has done so for more than 30 years. So again, they found that these are in common use, that they are owned enough in significant numbers to be in common use. But then things drastically shift. When they go and look at the restriction of New Jersey and try to justify it with, historical analysis, the court here is applying something known as the more nuanced approach based on societal concerns and new technology. This is something that was vaguely referenced in Bruen and was also, I believe, vaguely referenced in Rahimi. And the lower court here is taking that language and saying, yes, these are arms. Yes, they're in common use, but it's a big new societal concern and it's new technology, and therefore we're going to apply the more nuanced approach. So here again is where things really went off the rails. They're pretty much doing this public interest back end argument and balancing, even though, tiered-based scrutiny and public interest and all that was done away with the Bruen. Here they're trying to use that language about the nuanced approach and, different types of analogs, historical analogs and public interest to back end and backdoor in that analysis to uphold these restrictions on magazines. And that's exactly what the court does. Also in this decision, the court sua sponte, which means on their own, decided to stay this decision and its application for 30 days. Now, what that means is nothing is really going to change in New Jersey. What's going to happen now is, of course, probably the state of New Jersey is going to appeal Probably also the plaintiffs here are going to appeal because they want to get rid of the magazine ban. This is going to be appealed once again to the Third Circuit. So that's what's going on in New Jersey with the new decision about the New Jersey magazine ban and the rifle ban. This case will now proceed forward on appeal, but when we get more information, I will let you guys know. Also, if you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.